On Friday, May 22, 2020, at 2:40 p.m., Pakistan International Airlines Flight PK8303 was approaching Karachi-Jinnah International Airport with 99 people on board. The aircraft came down just 1.4 kilometers east of the airport in a densely populated urban neighborhood. Moments before impact, the pilots of an Airbus A320 attempted to land without the landing gear extended. The aircraft hit the ground on its belly. What sequence of events led these experienced pilots to ignore every warning and attempt an impossible landing? This wasn't just mechanical failure. It was a breakdown in human systems that should have made such an error impossible. I'm Captain James Harlow, a retired airline captain with 28 years in commercial aviation. I've spent countless hours analyzing accident reports, from the investigator's desk and from the pilot's seat. What happened on flight PK8303 reveals critical lessons about how even the most advanced aircraft can fail when human factors override layers of protection. Welcome aboard. Landing at Karachi-Jinnah is normally routine. It's a familiar airport, a well-established route for Pakistan International Airlines. Nobody expected this. The Airbus A320 is a modern, sophisticated aircraft with multiple layers of safety. Its systems include numerous redundancies, backup systems for critical components. Think of it like a safety net with many interwoven strands, each designed to catch you if another fails. Yet on this afternoon, something fundamental broke through those layers. This wasn't a simple mechanical glitch. It was a complex failure where human decisions and advanced technology intersected in the worst possible way. Flight PK8303 began like any other that Friday afternoon. From Lahore Allama Iqbal International Airport, Captain Gul and First Officer Azam were flying their Airbus A320-214, registration AP-BLD, on a standard domestic route to Karachi-Jinnah. This aircraft, manufactured in 2004, had accumulated 47,124 hours of flight time across 25,860 flights. Its engines, the CFM ICFM56-5B4/P, were known for reliability. The weather in Karachi was clear with good visibility, a typically uneventful day for flying. As the aircraft entered the terminal area, air traffic control cleared flight PK8303 for descent. This is a critical phase. During descent and approach, the crew manages the aircraft's energy, its speed and altitude, to position it precisely for a safe landing. It's like bringing a heavy object down from a high shelf, smoothly and under complete control. While the A320's advanced systems provide significant assistance, the pilots remain the ultimate authority, monitoring every parameter. The crew consisted of Captain Sajjad Gul and First Officer Usman Azam. Captain Gul, with over 18,000 hours of flight time, was a seasoned pilot with many years at Pakistan International Airlines. He was known for his calm demeanor and extensive experience. First Officer Azam was building his career with more than 1,400 hours. They were a standard crew pairing operating a familiar aircraft. On paper, everything was routine. But routine can breed complacency. Modern aircraft like the A320 are highly automated. They monitor hundreds of parameters and alert the crew to any deviation. An A320 has multiple audio and visual warnings for landing gear. For the gear not to be extended and for the crew to miss multiple explicit warnings suggests a profound breakdown, not just of a single system, but of the layers designed to back it up. This is what we call a Swiss cheese model failure, where holes in different layers of protection align. The A320 has sophisticated warning systems for the landing gear. If the aircraft descends below about 750 feet and 180 knots without the landing gear extended, a loud, clear voice alert sounds in the cockpit, repeating, "Too low gear! Too low gear!" This warning is continuous and cannot be silenced until the gear is down or the aircraft climbs. Visual indicators on the instrument panel would have clearly shown the gear was not extended. Every pilot analyzing this accident asks the same question. How did a highly experienced captain and qualified first officer overlook such fundamental and insistent warnings? This wasn't a subtle glitch. It was an overt alarm that should have triggered an immediate response. Beyond the cockpit were 99 people on board, each with their own story. You'd find a cross-section of life on a flight like PK8303. Amira Sohail was traveling to Karachi to reunite with her family after weeks apart. Omar Hassan, a businessman, was heading for a crucial meeting, perhaps reviewing contracts as the aircraft began its descent. Aisha Rahman, one of the flight attendants, had briefed her team on emergency procedures before takeoff. These were not just numbers. They were individuals with lives, plans, and loved ones waiting for them. This accident occurred in May 2020 during the global COVID-19 pandemic. Travel was already fraught with new anxieties and restrictions. The Pakistan Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, or AAIB Pakistan, would later launch a meticulous investigation, reference AAIB 431, to uncover every detail. Their focus would address both the technical failures and the intricate human factors at play. As flight PK8303 began its descent, air traffic control cleared it for runway 25 left. As Captain Gul and First Officer Azam continued their approach, a critical series of events unfolded. The aircraft descended below 750 feet, with its speed dropping to 180 knots, yet the landing gear remained retracted. This triggered the A320's automated warning system. A clear, insistent voice began repeating, "Too low, gear! Too low, gear!" This warning is designed to be impossible to ignore. It is continuous, loud, and cannot be silenced until the landing gear is correctly deployed. Yet the crew did not extend the gear. The warnings persisted. Visual indicators on the flight deck would have been glaringly obvious. The 3 green lights confirming gear down and locked were simply not illuminated. Red lights indicated an unsafe condition. How could this happen? It points to a profound lapse in crew resource management and procedural discipline, where multiple layers of safety were bypassed. At 2:35 p.m., flight PK8303 made its first attempt to land on runway 25 left at Karachi-Jinnah International Airport. Without the landing gear extended, the Airbus A320, weighing approximately 135,000 pounds, touched down on its 2 engines. The heavy engine nacelles scraped violently against the asphalt runway. The contact was brutal. Imagine dragging 2 massive, sensitive pieces of machinery along rough concrete at over 150 miles per hour. The damage was instantaneous and severe. Inside the cockpit, the crew felt a jarring jolt accompanied by a horrific scraping sound. The cockpit voice recorder later revealed a cacophony of alarms, not just the "too low, gear" warning, but new ones related to engine damage. The Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitor, or ECAM, instantly displayed "Engine 1 fault" and "Engine 2 fault" messages. But the immediate, visceral sensation of grinding metal on runway was unmistakable. Despite this catastrophic impact, the crew initiated a go-around. A go-around is a standard procedure when an approach is unstable or unsafe. But in this case, it was initiated after the aircraft had already impacted the runway. The damaged engines struggled to provide full thrust. The aircraft managed to climb to about 3,000 feet, heading east. For a brief moment, there might have been a false sense of relief in the cockpit. They were airborne again. While the aircraft was climbing, the damage from that first impact was setting an irreversible chain of events in motion. The engines had suffered critical internal and external damage. They were bleeding oil, losing hydraulic pressure, and struggling to maintain operational parameters. The pilots were trying to assess the situation. They communicated with air traffic control, but their description was incomplete. Captain Gul reported they were executing a go-around and flying a circuit. He made no mention of the belly landing or severe engine damage. This created a serious problem. Air traffic controllers, unaware of the runway contact, only heard that PK8303 was going around. They cleared the flight to climb and then to execute another approach. One controller even observed smoke from the aircraft, but mistook it for a normal exhaust plume. This initial miscommunication meant emergency services were not alerted to the true gravity of the situation. It was a critical missed opportunity to prepare for an imminent disaster. In the cabin, Amira Sohail felt the shudder of the first impact, far more severe than any typical landing. The brief climb that followed might have offered a moment of confused relief, but it was short-lived. For Omar Hassan, the initial grinding sound was terrifying. As the aircraft climbed, the cabin environment began to change. The normal hum of the engines was replaced by an unsettling vibration, a different, strained sound. The damage to the engines was extensive. Both engines had lost significant oil pressure. The oil systems were compromised and critical components were overheating. An engine cannot operate for long under such conditions. The flight data recorder would later show a rapid degradation of engine performance. These are complex machines that rely on intricate systems for lubrication and cooling. When those systems fail, an engine's lifespan is measured in minutes. As Flight PK8303 began its second approach, the engines were failing rapidly. At 2:38 p.m., just 3 minutes after the first impact, the left engine completely failed. The cockpit was inundated with new alarms, a master warning flashing intensely, and the ECAM displaying Engine 1 shutdown messages. The aircraft immediately became harder to control, with thrust now asymmetrical. Then, less than a minute later at 2:39 p.m., the right engine also failed. And that's where it all went wrong. With both engines completely inoperative, the Airbus A320 became a very heavy glider. The cockpit was inundated with alarms and warnings. The master warning light flashed intensely, accompanied by urgent audible chimes. The ECAM displayed a cascade of engine failure messages. The pilot cycled through emergency checklists, hoping for any sign of life from the engines. But the damage from the initial impact was simply too severe. Captain Gould made a final radio call, declaring, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." He informed air traffic control that both engines had failed. The aircraft was rapidly losing altitude. With the engines gone, the aircraft's glide ratio, how far it can fly for every foot it drops, was dramatically reduced. Every second counted. In the cabin, the brief sense of relief from the go-around dissolved into renewed terror as the engines went silent. Passengers felt the sudden, stomach-lurching descent. The lights flickered. The flight attendants, trained for emergencies, shouted, "Brace! Brace! Heads down! Stay down!" But there was nothing they could do to stop the inevitable. The aircraft, now a silent, accelerating projectile, aimed for a populated residential area. Captain Gould, using the last vestiges of control, attempted to steer the aircraft towards an open space, perhaps a dry riverbed, anything to avoid a direct hit on the homes below. This was not a remote, unpopulated area. Model Colony is a densely packed neighborhood full of houses, small businesses, and narrow streets. It was a final, heroic effort to mitigate the disaster, a pilot's last instinct to save lives even in the face of certain doom. But it was too late. At 2:40 p.m., Flight PK8303 impacted the ground in the Model Colony residential area, just 1.4 kilometers east of Karachi-Jinnah International Airport. The impact caused significant structural failure. The aircraft was destroyed. The Airbus A320 plunged towards the residential streets of Model Colony. Inside the cockpit, Captain Gould and First Officer Azam fought for control. The stick was heavy and sluggish, responding barely to his desperate inputs. The ECAM screens flashed a constant stream of failure messages. The master warning light pulsed relentlessly. The sounds of warnings were drowned out by the roar of wind rushing past the crippled airframe. The pilot's eyes darted between instruments and the rapidly approaching ground. They were aiming for the small open patch, a futile hope. The houses, cars, and market stalls all rushed up at impossible speed. There was no time. The ground was here. In the cabin, Amira Sohail clutched the armrests, her eyes wide with terror, seeing homes and trees blur into an indistinguishable smudge. Omar Hassan braced, his last thoughts undoubtedly of his family. The aircraft shuddered violently, a deep, tearing groan of metal twisting under immense pressure. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning fuel and ozone. Aisha Rahman was thrown against a galley wall, still trying to shout, "Brace," but her voice was lost to overwhelming noise. The G-forces pressed everyone deep into their seats, then lifted them abruptly as the nose dipped. The sound became an unbearable shriek as the fuselage began to tear apart. Glass shattered, lights flickered and died. The world outside the windows was a blur of earth and sky, then only earth. The deceleration was instantaneous, bone-jarring, then a final, deafening explosion. With both engines completely inoperative and the aircraft at such a low altitude, there were no viable recovery options. Captain Gul's attempt to guide the aircraft towards a less populated area was a testament to his training and character, a final, desperate act of mitigation. But physics had already decided the outcome. Without thrust, the A320 was a heavy glider, losing several hundred feet of altitude every minute. The damage sustained during the first aborted landing had set an irreversible chain of events in motion. There was simply no time or altitude to attempt a restart, even if the engines were capable, which they were not. In the immediate minutes following the impact, a cloud of black smoke billowed into the Karachi sky, visible for miles. The silence was broken almost instantly by the screams of residents and the frantic ringing of emergency services. The investigation by AAIB Pakistan, documented in report AAIB 431, confirmed the grim reality. 97 occupants lost their lives. One person on the ground was also killed by the impact. This was the tragic end of Pakistan International Airlines Flight PK8303. Imagine being in that cockpit. The forward view for Captain Gul and First Officer Azam transformed from a rapidly approaching urban grid to an instantaneous, violent obliteration of the windscreen. The impact was not singular, but a rapid sequence of collisions. First the lower fuselage, then the wings, tearing through residential structures. The forces on the airframe far exceeded design limits. The structural integrity failed. Inside the cabin, for Amira Sohail, Omar Hassan, and the others, the world became pure crushing force. Sounds of tearing metal, shattering glass, and splintering debris filled the space. The deceleration was so extreme, it distorted perception. It was an end to all motion, violent and absolute. At the moment both engines failed, the flight was essentially over. There was no time nor sufficient altitude to execute any recovery procedure. An A320, even a sophisticated one like AP-BLD, becomes a very heavy glider without engine thrust. With the engines critically damaged from the prior runway contact, restart procedures were futile. Captain Gul's final transmissions, his declared Mayday, and his efforts to steer towards an open area were the last acts of pilots fighting an already decided outcome. The laws of aerodynamics offer no second chances at such low altitude and close proximity to terrain. In the minutes immediately following the impact, the residential area of Model Colony was transformed into a scene of utter devastation. Emergency services, alerted by the Mayday call and the visual evidence of impact, began mobilizing. Police and rescue teams navigated through narrow streets, attempting to reach the wreckage amidst burning debris and damaged homes. The Pakistan Aircraft Accident Investigation Board initiated its standard protocol. Their first priority, securing the crash site and locating the flight recorders. These black boxes, designed to withstand immense forces, held the definitive record of Flight PK8303's final moments. The sheer scale of the accident demanded an immediate, meticulous inquiry. When we look at Flight PK8303, the tragedy wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a devastating sequence of failures, each making the next almost inevitable. From my seat, having flown 28 years, I see three critical factors that sealed the fate of that Airbus A320. First, the most fundamental breakdown was the crew's failure to extend the landing gear during the initial approach, and their decision to continue that approach despite being unstable and receiving multiple warnings. Modern airliners like the A320 are engineered with numerous layers of redundancy to prevent such a basic oversight. There are audible warnings, visual alerts on the instrument panel, and the aircraft's internal logic will issue a too low gear call out repeatedly if the landing gear is not down when approaching below 750 feet. Yet the crew, trying to manage an approach that was already too high and too fast, became so fixated on speed and altitude corrections that they missed the most basic yet absolutely vital step of extending the landing gear. This was not a mechanical malfunction. The AAIB Pakistan report AAIB 431 was unambiguous. It was a human error in executing a fundamental checklist item, a lapse that no amount of advanced automation could compensate for if the pilots were not processing its output. Managing an unstabilized approach is a significant challenge, one pilots are extensively trained for. The procedure dictates that if an approach cannot be stabilized by a certain altitude, typically 1,000 feet above the airport, a go-around must be initiated. The crew of Flight PK8303 continued their descent despite being high and fast, pushing the envelope rather than resetting with a go-around. This decision to press on, compounded by the failure to lower the gear, led directly to the aircraft touching down on its belly. Second, a critical turning point and major contributing factor was the crew's incomplete acknowledgement and inaccurate assessment of the damage after that first ground contact. When an aircraft weighing close to 135,000 pounds scrapes its engines and fuselage along a concrete runway at over 150 miles per hour, the physical forces are immense. The noise, vibrations, sudden jarring, and damage are not subtle. Yet, after initiating the go-around and climbing away from the runway, the crew did not immediately report to air traffic control that they had executed a belly landing or sustained significant damage. They simply communicated they were performing a go-around, as if it were routine. This indicated a profound and dangerous disconnect between the reality of the situation and the crew's perception of it. The AAIB Pakistan report detailed how this failure to properly recognize and acknowledge the damage's severity prevented the crew from declaring an urgent emergency and initiating appropriate procedures for a critically compromised aircraft. Instead of focusing on the immediate implications of engine damage, they continued planning for a second, seemingly normal landing attempt. This delayed understanding of their aircraft's condition fatally undermined their ability to make informed decisions about the unfolding crisis. Accurately identifying the problem is always the first step toward finding a solution. Without that crucial step, recovery becomes nearly impossible. This points to a systemic issue in crew resource management and situational awareness within the cockpit, where the sheer impact was not fully registered or communicated. Third, the crew's decision to attempt to prolong the flight and maneuver for a second landing with engines that had already sustained severe damage was the final, irreversible factor. When Captain Gould initiated the go-around after the belly landing and applied full thrust, the engines were already critically compromised. The runway scrape had ruptured internal oil and fuel lines, critically impairing their operational integrity. As the aircraft climbed to approximately 3,000 feet and began to circle, the engines began to fail rapidly due to this internal damage and lack of lubrication and fuel. This was an aircraft that was already broken. By continuing to fly and position for another landing, rather than immediately seeking the quickest possible emergency touchdown, perhaps on the remaining runway or any available open space, the crew consumed vital altitude and precious time. An A320 loses several hundred feet of altitude every minute without engine power. From 3,000 feet over a densely populated urban area, with both engines failing, there was simply no margin for error, no altitude for recovery, and no viable options left to avoid a devastating impact. The chain of events, set in motion by the initial oversight, became tragically irreversible with this final, desperate, and ultimately futile maneuver. This decision highlights the profound pressure crews face, but also a lapse in prioritizing an immediate, forced landing over a planned but impossible second attempt. The AAIB Pakistan investigation, culminating in its final report AAIB 431, was unsparing in its findings. It confirmed a deeply troubling combination of factors. The crew's attention was completely consumed by an unstabilized approach, leading them to disregard multiple, unambiguous warnings about the landing gear. These modern cockpit alerts, audible chimes, visual flashing lights, and synthetic voice callouts like "too low, gear," went unheeded. After the initial belly scrape, the crew's failure to accurately assess and report the severe damage was a critical breakdown in situational awareness. They communicated they were simply executing a go-around, as if it were routine, failing to grasp the fundamental compromise of their aircraft. The report concluded this was not a mechanical malfunction of the A320 systems, but a failure of the human element to properly interact with and respond to those systems, creating a situation that should have been entirely avoidable. While Flight PK8303 did not lead to entirely new global regulations, its findings significantly reinforced existing international aviation safety standards. Airlines worldwide, including Pakistan International Airlines, were directed to re-emphasize the absolute criticality of adhering to unstabilized approach criteria, the mandatory response to landing gear warnings, and the comprehensive assessment of aircraft damage after any abnormal event. This renewed focus on fundamental airmanship and strict adherence to checklists, particularly during critical phases of flight, serves as a constant reminder for pilots across the industry. Every reinforced safety briefing, every updated simulator scenario, and every pilot who now double-checks their gear position with renewed vigilance contributes to preventing similar tragedies. This collective learning, born from such immense loss, continues to safeguard millions of lives every day. The memory of the 97 souls aboard Flight PK8303 and the one person on the ground endures as a stark lesson in the unforgiving nature of our profession. As captains, we train relentlessly for every conceivable failure, from engine fires to hydraulic losses. This accident presents a unique challenge to our understanding of human factors. The AAIB Pakistan report was very clear that the crew fundamentally misjudged the severity of their aircraft's condition after that first runway contact. With the sheer violence of a belly landing at high speed, why do you think these experienced pilots failed to recognize and report the catastrophic damage their Airbus A320 had sustained? Look, this channel is built on breaking down complex events for the facts and lessons we can all learn. If you appreciate this kind of in-depth analysis from an insider's perspective, please consider giving this video a like. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps our independent channel reach more people who are passionate about aviation safety. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Becoming a member means you're supporting the kind of detailed, fact-driven content you won't find anywhere else. And I always read your comments. So, on that question about the crew's assessment of damage, I'm genuinely interested in hearing your thoughts. Share your insights below,